Director.
Yeah. Where are we going? What do we hope to achieve with 5 cameras?
So, gents, what is the most interesting thing you've read on the internet this last month or so? Any good articles, good stuff you've seen?
Yeah, but I'm a nerd, so like the coolest thing I've read on the internet is literally like it'll be like a Keenan Malik column, who's a guy who writes for The Guardian.
Okay, like it.
I can't remember, actually, to be honest.
I would need to get my phone.
I also don't read a lot on my phone. I was just I read a book, and that's mostly where I've been. Yeah, it's like.
What'd you read, Maui?
The Sorrows and Pleasures of Work by Alain de Botton. It's a nice book.
Mm-hmm.
Surprised by how it was structured.
And you?
Me, I am reading a fantastic book right now, Super Communicators. Highly recommend it to everyone. I'm only like 2 chapters in, and it's blowing my mind because it really breaks down the structure of like a conversation and how you can like formulate it in a way to ensure that like negotiations go well, or that you can get what you want out of conversations. So perfect segue, because today we're going to talk about how people come up with ideas. Habib and I are more of the writers on the team. Maui is our amazing sketch artist and experienced designer. So let's get into it.
You wrote a post about sketching, Maui. First of all, what does sketching mean to you? And what is the power of sketching?
Power of sketching is to visualize something that's really complex to understand and to make it as easily as possible to comprehend for people. That's how I view sketching, especially in how I work within Bump. Since I'm not really good with words, that's how I tend to communicate information.
And so like what is sketching literally?
Scribbles on a paper, and then to be comprehended as easily as possible without like all the words and syntaxes and stuff like that.
And you sometimes sketch when we're at a table, like having a brainstorm or discussing something. Yeah. You're like seemingly not paying attention, sketching.
Because
is that because you don't
how I'm going to visualize it?
You don't understand our words, so you're like, let me just make sense of this.
No, I'm not ignoring you guys. I'm constantly thinking how this could be like a physical, visual thing.
When you're sketching, do you already have the visual in your head of like what you're trying to create, or does it just kind of come piece by piece until it's
it comes piece by piece, but it goes really quickly in my head. Like I see shapes and 3D spaces easily. Then I think I don't know if you guys have that as well. I don't want to come off like I have this superpower,
visionary,
of 3-dimensional spaces quickly in my head. But yeah, that's why I'm just like quiet.
And what was the point of your post? Because you were making a point as well, like something about sketching is a bit of a lost art.
Yeah.
Or it's being lost.
Well, I've seen it, especially when I was studying product design. A lot of students, a lot of classmates of mine tend to quickly skip that step and just immediately draw stuff in 3-dimensional on a computer, which is parametric. And it kind of really takes them away from that brainstorming concept phase where you're really like just throwing in some ideas here and there before you actually just start drawing fixed lines, which kind of constrains you into putting you in this like specific direction, and then kind of ignores other possibilities which you can get with sketching. And that's kind of like the point. It's really the best way to show abstract ideas, and then to really have as much as various ideas you can produce. With sketching you can do that, but immediately skipping that step and going to like parametric design, it's not like how I want to.
Yeah. It reminds me of what some people say about writing. They really prefer to write like physically first, because there's something about like transmitting the idea onto a page.
I guess you have it as well. I mean, as content copywriters or people who write a lot of LinkedIn posts.
Yeah, I mean, for me with writing, I like doing it on a computer just because I think my brain is going too fast, or at least faster than what I could physically write down. So I'm always typing away, like stream of consciousness level, just getting it out there. But for sketching, I think it's definitely like a specific art, right? It's
Well, I mean, funny enough, like when I was coming up with that LinkedIn post, it took me a long time to find the structure. And I guess you guys, it comes off easily. Like you really know how to structure like ideas. And I find that a lot difficult. So that's why I tend to be more like visually just drawing things.
But you find it way easier to structure shapes.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like I see pictures vividly and I can draw them quickly. But with structuring sentences and ideas, like verbally and writing them down, it's such a pain in the ass.
But I guess a lot of it is just pattern recognition, right? Because like you can put all these step-by-step guides, whatever, on LinkedIn or read them in books. But ultimately, I feel like if someone just does it enough, they'll be able to skip most of those steps because you can just do it naturally.
Yeah.
Whereas the guides are always a bit like mechanical and methodical. Yeah. So maybe it's just, if you just did it more, maybe.
I guess I don't do it enough. I mean, I read books, but that's until there. But I don't write. I don't have a daily journal or something. I don't know if you guys have that.
I do.
Maybe links.
Not daily journal, no. But I do write a lot of thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you always like doodle growing up? Were you always a sketcher? Yeah.
I like to go outside and just draw the first thing I see. Like if it's a tree, a bench, or when drawing people is the most difficult. Like that's also what I try to do when drawing some concepts for Bump, is having also the full scale people. It's like you're also telling a narrative with the visuals. You create this storytelling narrative with these sketches. So I just really like, it's like my stream of consciousness. It's just like doodling, but usually drawing stuff that I see and then trying to make variations within it and kind of deconstructing it and then making a totally new thing out of it.
Yeah. I envy that. I think that's really cool because I've always, like my whole life, I've always loved like art and design, but actually having something come to life, like visualizing it, like I've never been able to do that. I've always been so bad at understanding like distance and space and like giving depth to drawings. So I think that's really cool.
I envy you guys with how quickly you come up with ideas and just like be so eloquent about it. I mean, just articulate it so like you go straight to the, like there's like a structure. There's an introduction, you go to the conclusion. Like sometimes I don't even know how to end like sentences or like ideas. And so if my way of coming up with ideas is drawing stuff and visualizing them, how does it work with like you verbal people?
You verbal people.
Yeah. You can go first.
Yeah, okay. I don't know. I mean, I always had a fascination with writing. Growing up, I loved to write. I loved my English classes. I loved literature. And I think over time, I was just always someone who, like, if I had an idea or a thought, I would just write it down. And I think by doing that, just my whole life and always just being fascinated with the written word, I think it just has allowed me to just sort of create like a structure in my head of how something should sound. And then, of course, I studied journalism, and a lot of journalism involves very detailed, crisp copy. Yeah. And so there's just like a certain specificity to that kind of writing. And it's like you're just trying to get the most important points out. So I guess for me, it is always just like, okay, we have this big idea, this big concept. Let's jot down a bunch of bullet points of like, what is relevant to that, what we're trying to say, what we're trying to communicate, and then kind of start to see patterns emerge of like how things are related or not related at all. Maybe there are things that are less important or more important, et cetera, and just kind of working your way through kind of how that should be communicated. But I think with writing, there is kind of there's always a structure, right? There's a beginning, a middle, and end. And so it's just about figuring out what fits where and having it be this like cohesive thing. Because I think the best writing is writing that is very conversational and very approachable. So if you keep it simple and you write in the way that you would explain it to someone or speak to a friend about something, then I think that that's kind of the sweet spot of what makes you a good writer.
And
Habib.
What were you gonna say?
I wanted to ask if like is there like a certain like writer that inspires you? Like, I mean, where do you get most of those inspiration?
And I've had different writers throughout my life that I've really loved. I always really loved like classical literature, like Emily Dickinson, Emily Bronte, like yeah, I would just read anything and everything that I could growing up. As I've gotten older, like when I went more into like academics, Noam Chomsky, we talked about Chomsky a lot, really fascinated by his work, a mixture of things. I really love nonfiction from just really intelligent people who have practical advice. I really love good world building and like stories. So like J.R.R. Tolkien, for example, master of world building. So yeah, so I've just always been fascinated.
And you like try to copy and use their style and see how it fits in your own way of writing, or
not really, just because I was never someone who's that interested in writing fiction necessarily. I was always more interested in the nonfiction world and reporting, which is why I went into journalism, but or studied journalism. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's really just like a structural thing more than anything. It's like you see the reality of what's in front of you or what it is that you're trying to accomplish with your writing, and you just kind of reverse engineer it from there. But you thoughts?
Yeah, my answer would be pretty boring because it's like mostly the same stuff. Like like reading. I think reading at a young age is probably really important, but then not to put people off and be like, you will never be able to write if you didn't do that. I think I studied journalism as well, and I think journalism school is really good at like instilling this like journalistic sensibility in you. So like what's relevant and what's not. I just remember I had one lecturer, like professor, who she was just so brutal if there was like bullshit in your piece, and she would just walk around and like read your intro and be like, rubbish, this is rubbish, take out that word, that sucks. And so if you have that kind of voice in your head, it makes you brutal with your own writing, which I noticed that like in the corporate world, a lot of people just don't have that. So sometimes I look at things people have written and just immediately jumping out at me are like 20 words in the first few sentences that you could just cut. Because a lot of people, and I had it as well at journalism school, you're attached to your own writing, or you think everything is important because everything is linked. All ideas are linked. You can link everything in the world together, but you don't need that for that specific thing. So I feel like good writing can be learned. There is like a structure to it, like Ali said. And once you get better at that, you can kind of skip certain things or not have to think about it so much because you just immediately know, oh, that would be the perfect intro. That would work here. Oh, I need this now. You don't need to really go through all those motions like you would when you're first learning. So yeah, that's the most important thing. And then like reading good writers helps. Even if you're not consciously reading them to learn, you just absorb things that they do. But I always find like I prefer writing to talking just because it allows me to like organize my thoughts. But I always feel like if I'm talking, I'm much more scatterbrained, which some people love talking. And I feel like most writers or people who are good at writing prefer to write. I've seen lots of interviews, which is a thing you should never really do. Like look up your writing heroes on YouTube because you'll just be usually disappointed because they're quite bad speakers a lot of the time. And you just really see it like, wow, how do they seem so incisive and clear when they write? And then yet when they speak, they're just kind of all over the place, or they're very timid and shy because a lot of them are introverts. So like writers that come to mind for me is like, I think the best nonfiction writers, especially, some can do both, but often there's like a clear divide. They're just so, not only are they so clear, they have this like pattern recognition thing whereby they see almost like the poeticness in certain things. Like there's a guy, Sam Anderson for New York Times Magazine. He is really good at this. He wrote a story a couple months back about his dog dying, or his new dog and his previous dog dying. And just when I like, it's such a nerdy thing. I haven't done this much since university, but I really sat there and like broke down the piece in my like notes app on my iPhone and Mac, and broke down like what he was doing well, because it was so good. And there were so many parts that were just like perfect patterns of like, it's hard to remember, but like say there was like a hole in the floor in his house and he would make that more poetic about like the kind of hole in his life that was left once his dog died. That one seems really basic and straightforward, but there were more complex ones that he was just like, like I wouldn't even look into that in the way that he did. So he's really good. But then in terms of like incisive, just clear-minded, clear, thoughtful writers, I really like Rachel Cusk. She's like a British Canadian writer. She does nonfiction and fiction. Zadie Smith, I really love her nonfiction. More so than her fiction, even though she's kind of more well-known for her fiction. And then there's like many other like classic ones like John Didion and people like that. But they're really good. I feel like for people to look at and read nonfiction if they want to do stuff like you're saying, kind of become better thinkers or structure their thoughts in a better way. Maybe that would help than like a very kind of colorful prose that you would get in fiction.
Well, another question I wanted to ask is, I mean, you both come from an educational background where you had to study writing and you got feedback, and like you were saying with that teacher of yours, it really drilled you to think in a specific way. What would be like your tip to someone who didn't have that background? Like, especially me, mostly what I did at school was just really coming up with ideas, but not really putting it into words or having to speak them.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say as well, I'm like, did we go to the same school? Because I also got bullied into being a better writer.
It does a lot.
It does. Yeah. I think it's really eye-opening. I think I grew up always being told that I was a good writer. So I thought like, oh, okay, I'm a good writer, right? And then you get to university
they kill you,
and they tear you apart. And so I think just the reality of it is that your writing can't exist in a bubble, in a vacuum. The point of writing is to get your ideas out to other people. So you need to have other people look at your work. And as daunting and horrible as that can feel sometimes, and as stressful as that can be, exactly. But that's how you get better, right? It's not just, having a university professor tell you, this is terrible or we need to fix this, whatever. It's also having your peers look at it, asking friends, family members, whomever, to look at your writing and give their perspective as well. Just because if you only write, I think, for yourself, that's all fine and good. But if the purpose is for some kind of making something happen, like whether that's in business or your personal life or what have you, it's always good to get more eyes on it. And it's good to get other perspectives. And I think being open to that and being able to, I don't know, it's a bit of a balance, right? Because I think...
But even the step of showing your work to someone else...
exactly. It's terrifying. And I think you have to have enough conviction to know, I will defend my writing. This is why I love it. This is why I wrote it this way. But you also have to be open to some of that criticism of like, okay, maybe we could reword this, or maybe there's a bit more nuance that could be added here. So I think it's the confidence of knowing that anyone can be a writer, right? Anyone's capable of being a good writer. It's something that can be learned, but it's just also about the willingness to improve your writing. Like you really can't just write something and then say, okay, I'm going to lock this away and never let anyone read it ever. And then, I don't know, a month later, put it out into the world. And then maybe it's not as good as it could have been if you would maybe ask like 3 of your friends to look at it and just kind of get their opinions. So it's terrifying and it's not fun, but it, I think, is the best way to kind of help you shape your thoughts in a way that's coherent and cohesive and actually accomplishes whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. So I think it's kind of the practice of being willing to share that with people. I think that's what makes you a much better writer. And I think in like journalism school, or if you study English or whatever it is, you are kind of forced into that. I don't know about your program as well, but it's like you're really forced to put your work in front of everyone at all times, and it really is kind of like a performative thing in a way where everyone is critiquing each other's work. So okay, great talk, great chat, right? Let's bring it home here, and quick game for us maybe. Let's finish each other's sentences. So I'll start a sentence and then we'll rapid fire kind of have everyone complete it, right? So let's start with the best way to
come up with an idea is
to visualize and sketch it.
But you have to keep it going, right?
You
can't just end the thought.
We're zip-zap-zopping this. Let's go.
Right, keep going. Just.
And
what's
your favorite
way to finish?
I could only think of offensive stuff. A way to finish.
With a limited budget.
You.
You have to make a sentence. I already started a sentence, mate.
What is the quickest way to
build a
giant home in the middle of nowhere
with just wood and nails
and one single hammer
and a can-do attitude?
Is by doing a lot of
flag waving
in your backyard,
wearing a bathrobe.
With the stars and stripes.
And no shoes.
Just slippers.
And some power tools.
This is going off the rails. Yeah, okay. I think we can add a full stop to the end of it. I think we will.
Yes.